Like when you're talking about mechanical tension, so rep speed. Like right now, you kind of see a lot of people like really slowing down. Like they want to feel it. I want to get the tension. They talk about the tension. So their eccentrics are like super slow. The concentrics are even really slow. And the lows are obviously lighter. Is that a negative, do you think, as far as like hypertrophy, or what do you think is going on with that in comparison, let's say someone who's a little bit faster paced with their rep cadence?
I mean, when we look at the research on like rep tempo, unless you're at an extreme end of like 10-second eccentric or something like that, it kind of comes out similar outcomes. So it's a great tool if you're trying to work around aches and pains to kind of slow things down a little bit, especially the eccentric. But when we, kind of going back to just the motor unit recruitment and the fiber recruitment principle that's kind of underlying a lot of this is, if you go slow, eventually you're going to reach task failure. Like you're still going to get high degrees of motor unit recruitment and high degrees of tension at the fiber level. So I don't think it matters that much if we're doing a set of 30 that's clean versus a set of 15 that's really slow and clean. But I think the set of 15 that's clean is going to probably outperform like the sloppy set of 30. So I think keeping technique at the forefront as you progress is extremely important. And I think another thing that's kind of worth reminding people of is we know that volume and hypertrophy has this like inverted U-like relationship. We ideally to optimize progress kind of at the top of that, bell curve. And then if we do too much, recovery starts to be compromised. We might still see a net positive in terms of gains, but it might not be what is optimal if we were to manage recovery better. But if we think about this inverted U on this X and Y axis, basically anything above the X axis is going to be like net gains. That's like positive hypertrophy there. And so I think a lot of people assume where they're at in their journey is dictated by what they just did. And they're always sort of assuming they're operating at the minimum effective dose. But let's say you have this inverted U and you're kind of on the right side of it early in your training career. Like maybe you're doing too much, or maybe you're doing enough, but you're doing a lot of sets because they aren't precise. But even if you pull back volume, it doesn't mean that you're falling below the minimum effective dose, because you might have been, you're likely 99% of the time going to be operating above that anyway. So falling back a bit, as you alluded to earlier, Jeff, it still puts us under that curve in most cases, unless you go to an extreme end or stop training. And it takes relatively little volume to maintain muscle mass, really, which is kind of an advantage. And it's a cool aspect that, if you trained a lot growing up, you can maintain it. Like if you're not trying to necessarily build more muscle. If I wasn't trying to build more muscle at this point, I would probably just train a couple days a week, and I bet I could maintain pretty much everything, So
like, I know I can do that. It's just mentally it would be hard for me just to train 2 days a week.
Exactly. But you're a competitive bodybuilder too.
Yeah. Like through contest prep, I know, okay, I can bring volume down and it's going to be a positive because my recovery is going to be a lot better. But yeah, I can see.
Yeah.
It's just I think it's more mentally challenged for people to bring the volume down.
Yeah, it is for sure.
Need to, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the minimum effective, I wouldn't even say minimum effective volume, maybe rephrase it to like minimum effective stimulus. That's going to inch up over time. But you might start here, and across your training career, you might be wavering, and it just might be slowly catching up. And it might never catch where you're at. But it's not predicated on what you did the session before. Like, it's not like if you did 2 sets this week, that's all of a sudden your minimum effective dose. Now you need to do 3. Or if you did 100 pounds, now you need to do 105. Like you're probably already starting in the middle of that curve. And so you have some wiggle room either way. If you were always operating at the minimum effective dose, hypothetically, if we would even know that, then yeah, you would probably have to be more assertive with your increases over time. But nobody's really doing that. Does that make sense?
That's the question for a lot of people is like, they don't really know where to operate it.
Yeah.
Like, is it 2 sets? Is it 3? Is it 5?
And they
4?
split hairs and they look for the magic number instead of just going in and doing the work and being reactionary with it. You know, if you're making progress, you're staying healthy and you're enjoying the gym, it's like you don't need to add anything, you know, and especially as an advanced athlete, because progress at this point is slower, obviously. And so any progress that you see is great, you know, any increase in strength is great. And so I think that curve kind of closes a little bit, and there's a little bit less wiggle room as you progress across your training career. And doing more, there's a greater risk of doing more having a net negative effect as you're more advanced than there is early on, I'd say.
That's been my experience. Like when I've tried to run like more set volume, like actually trying to increase sets throughout a mess up.
Yeah.
Like the only thing I get is a bunch of aches and pains.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's
stress because now I'm in the gym longer than I should be. And
that's the other thing too, Jeff, is you look at your set, 2 of your sets probably equal 5 of somebody else because of the effort that you put in there and the proximity to failure and the quality of your repetitions. And that's why I, especially over the last few years, I've wanted to see people's training kind of more and more and more and more as a coach, because for the reason that you talk about, if I saw 2 of your sets, I would say, okay, you know what? If we increase a set, let's do 1 set maybe every 3rd week. You know? Whereas if there was somebody else that they were a little bit, maybe they were cutting depth on their range of motion, you know, or they weren't quite as clean, or they were cutting it a further away from failure, you know. I probably might do one of 2 things. I'll say, okay, let's either A, go ahead and add volume, but don't change any of your technique, as long as it's, kind of keep in mind when I say this, I'm thinking decent technique and form, right? But yeah, let's go ahead and add a set, because I feel like from what I've seen, we don't want to change any other variable, but yeah, we can add a set here or add a set there. Or B, I'll say, okay, let's not add any volume, but more range of motion, slower on the eccentric, et cetera, you know.
those are skill components.
Those are for sure.
Absolutely.
So
that's how I look at lifting now, is more from a skill set. Like looking at other sports. Like you guys hear me talk about this all the time. Like I don't look at, I mean, yeah, I pay attention to the science and all that, but I look at like other sports more so. Like, what are they doing? Like, I'm not going to have like Manute Bol toss up 23 pointers in a game unless I want him to hit 20%. Steph Curry, yeah, I'm going to let him shoot 30 times because he's going to make maybe half of those.
He's got a higher percentage, yeah.
His quality his skill is higher. So it's like, okay, how can I get Manute Bol to shoot like Steph Curry? It's like, let me let him shoot 10 in a game, maybe 5 in a game, but in practice, he's going to get a lot more attempts there. It's just kind of like weight training. It's like, if I'm doing a curl, let me work on A to B first before I start tossing in a bunch of sets. Because if my skill isn't all that great, now I'm doing like 5 crappy ass sets. So, I'm not saying someone would get hurt, but the risk could go up for like elbow issues and things like that. So I'd rather have someone start at 2 or 3 sets. And like you said, Brad, let's just make sure your skill is really good from A to B, like nice and clean. And then we'll worry about load and reps after that. And then, because once you're done with the skill, you got the skill down. It's like, okay, now if we get reps and load, that's going to carry us so far. That's going to be an increase in volume. And then when you plateau out, then the question always is, why are we plateaued in the gym? Why can't we increase load or reps anymore? You got to look at
Or
other,
do we even have to? Do we need to let the adaptations catch up to what you're doing?
Yeah, because sometimes you sit in the pocket. It's like, okay, I'm kind of stuck. But then if you just keep at it, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks go by. Well, you get adapted to it. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just got another rep.
And that's the tricky part is when do you know that you've adapted to it? It could take more than 6, 7, 8 weeks. You could continue beginning adaptations from that and skill development and all that other stuff that we talked about.
Well, that's where the reactionary, like to me, advanced bodybuilding is more, it's more about being reactionary in the moment, not like what your fancy spreadsheet says or how much how many set volume you have on there because you think you should be doing X amount because you're advanced. It's more like how you can call adjustments. Like Tom Brady comes up to the line, scans the field, like, oh shit, I got 6 defensive backs. Well, I don't think I'm going to throw. I'm going to hand the ball off right here.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. But yes, for me, it's like skill acquisition first, performance after that. By plateau, then it's like maybe it's more volume if you have enough available energy to do it. Like if you're fatigued out, it's like it's not a good idea to add a bunch of volume in there. Yeah. So volume over time, it's not linear. It's not like Jeff in year 1 was doing 2 sets, and then in year 38, I'm doing 5 sets across the board and everything. It's kind of just gone up and down, up and down, up and down.
I think, if anything, I think a strong case could be made. You might benefit from more sets early on, and then they come down over time because your proficiency increases.
Yeah, exactly. Because you need more. You need Manu Bol needs 30 shots in order to hit Steph Curry's 10. He shoots 20, he gets 10.